time blocking isn't enough. You have to take action. And I think people are conflating with put this on your calendar and you're going to do it.
That's right.
And that isn't good enough.
Welcome to the Disruptance Podcast. Here are your hosts, Eric Forney and Michael Bounds.
Mike, every week on the show, we aim to disrupt the way real estate agents and entrepreneurs think about their business to make them more profitable and productive. And this week, I want to disrupt the way you think about bad advice. And the bad advice that we hear over and over and over in productivity circles, and especially in our industry, is just time block it. You know, Mike, if you want to accomplish something in life, if you have really big goals and you haven't achieved them yet, why don't you just time block it? And what I want to dispel today is the awful advice of just time block it. And I know that you're a proponent of time blocking, so I can't wait to start this conversation.
Well, I'm thinking about all the times I'm the guy that's telling people to time block it. So like I'm thinking all the people that are saying, hey, that's the guy that's telling me to. So that's why I smiled like that.
Well, what's interesting to me is that if just time block it worked, or just eat healthy were effective, then what we wouldn't need were 60,000 books on Amazon for time management. Because if it were as easy as just put it on your calendar, we would totally collapse the self-help industry of time management. And so what I want to talk about today is why most advice, or most of the simplified, what Tyler and I have now dubbed as just-isms, like just think bigger or just time block it, most of the time is actually detrimental to someone's progress. And so one of the challenges I've had recently in coaching a lot of our CEOs and top agents is that they're unable to get everything done in their day that they, of course, want to get done, and they're unsure of how to prioritize that. That's the challenge I think that we all run into, especially in an on-demand world. And so most people give them the advice of just time block it or just put it on your calendar. And I know that that's advice that you like. So I want to really unpack and understand why it works for you and doesn't work for me. So from a time blocking perspective, how has time blocking been effective for you from a growth perspective?
So I guess doing big things to me is about habits. So time blocking allows me to develop the muscle to create the habit, if that makes sense. So like time blocking gives me, so in my mind, if something's important for me, I normally set an appointment for it. So I never would move like if I have an appointment to meet with a client, I wouldn't move that to do something else. If I have a hair appointment, I know I haven't spent a long time since I went to the barber shop, but I wouldn't necessarily move that. So time blocking allows me a physical time in my day to where I make sure I can get what's important to me done. And by having the discipline to make it then becomes a habit. And then I don't necessarily have to time block for it because the habit is then created, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, one thing I want to highlight that you mentioned is, a couple of themes from that is one, that if you time block it, then that you build the discipline, or you exert the discipline to take action on it, and that you follow that time block that you set aside. The key word that I think shows up in there is the idea of like self-discipline or self-control, or what amounts to be really an executive function. And for those that have high executive function, as in like they have the ability to exert self-control and willpower, time blocking works really well. Because what I heard you say is that you wouldn't not do something that you set out your intention to go do. Right? If you said, hey, I'm going to make 5 calls and I've set my attention to make these 5 calls, you honor that commitment to yourself. Is that accurate?
Well, I think it's actually not willpower. What it does is it falls on the habit, because I set the time block on a regular basis, which allows me to create a habit. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see the premise of it. I see the downfall of it in that when we typically give people the advice of time block, what we find is they very rarely take action on the items they time block.
They'll put it on their calendar, but they won't actually take action.
That's right.
So it's more than just time blocking. You have to then take action during the time block.
So
I
what
agree with you
causes
there.
that difference then for you?
What causes so I was, for the longest time, I was the guy that had stuff on my calendar that when it came along, I just kept doing what it is that I was doing. It's just, you have to, what allowed me to like not do that is if I do it it's having the discipline to do it the first time and then creating the habit around doing the behavior during that time, then it's a habit. It's not, to me, when I'm say I'm lead generating, and I always tell this story. You know, I read a book, and everybody who's talked to me has heard this story. So you are 287% more likely to be a millionaire if you make your bed. And I don't know if you guys know me. I'm not naturally a bed maker. Okay. So it's the habit of making that bed every day, the activity, and then the cumulative activity, that's where the rewards come from. So time blocking allows me to do that activity every day, and then I don't have to rely on willpower because I do it every day at a certain time. If I let that time pass, and I'm relying on my willpower, because now I'm making phone calls or I'm lead generating at 6 o'clock at night, and now I'm relying on my willpower. But if I time block during the day, set an appointment, that's my habit, then the energy level is much lower, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think time blocking has a lot to do with your priorities. Kay and I were talking about it, and like if you don't know your priorities, and it kind of depends on your priorities, if basically what you're doing is essentially just creating time for, like, using a finite amount of time for those said priorities. But if you don't know your priorities, then time blocking just time block time to do blank. Like, well, what is it? And is it a priority? And if it's not, you're just like time blocking to meal prep. If meal prep's not a total priority, like,
you don't do it. So I'll give you a perfect example. We're in a world where, you know, we celebrate touchdowns, we celebrate slam dunks. In real estate, we celebrate contracts, right? But me and you don't even think about contracts. You think about the leading indicators, that the contract is the lagging indicator. So I time block for those leading indicators so that I don't even have to think about the lagging indicator. I don't even think about how many contracts I write. So if I don't have clarity around that priority, if I don't have clarity around that actual activity, then I won't do it.
Okay, so I want to make sure you both know that you're well intended and wrong. And here's why I say this is that if we subscribe to the ideas of these just-isms of, like, just make it a priority, even, let's say, we're still relying on one's ability to exercise executive function. And so, like, as two people who are highly ADHD, what we have is really an executive functioning disorder, right? As we know what to do, but knowing what to do is not effective in doing. And that's because we typically don't have the issue of knowledge. It's the problem is applying knowledge. Typically, in
application
is someone with an executive functioning issue like ADHD, and so what's required then it really eventually needs to be like environmental control and a number of different like tactics or techniques to create outcomes. And so when you think about building habits to time block, let's say, or when you think about building habits to meal prep or to eat healthy, all of that works great. However, it requires a series of a number of steps in order to get to the necessary actions to even make it effective. So let's break down meal prep, for example. So if we want to eat healthy, how many habits go into eating healthy and meal prepping? Because unfortunately, meal prepping is actually not a habit. Meal prepping is actually a series of actions that lead to being able to meal prep alone. Because I have to do what? I have to wash dishes. So therefore I've got to have clean utensils, right? I've got to have the right equipment and clean equipment. I've got to go grocery shopping, which is an activity that I have to have taken. So I've had to have had a habit to somehow get the right list of ingredients together, the right recipe together, have gotten to the grocery to order them, and then I've got to have them all washed, and I've got to have all my equipment that's necessary together, and I need to know my recipes and have the oven preheated and all these other items done.
Right.
It is actually a series of a number of events. It's that series of events that actually cripples someone like Tyler and I, or that actually cripples most of us, by the way. Because what we actually needed in that example was about 6 new habits, and we have a really hard time building just one.
Right.
And that's because we exist on a set of habits today, which means building a new one creates a whole new working of a habit loop every time we add one. And the example of meal prep, there's 6 or 5 or however we slice it. And so when we think about everything that we're trying to create, quote unquote, like priority for or take action on, we actually end up having to rewire an entire set of habit loops for us every time we do one new thing. So what I would argue is that time blocking is just awful advice, because what we really need is environmental control. We need to create a world where meal prepping is the only outcome. And even more next level would be then, how do we not meal prep at all? How do we let someone else who has the habit of meal prep deliver everything that's needed to take the first 5 steps out of that activity?
Yeah, I guess time blocking for me provides the environment to where, no, this is what I'm doing. You see what I'm saying? I'm protecting that moment in time in order to do that. It's in my mind, I'm setting part a time, an environment for that to happen.
Yeah, I totally understand. Like, I'll go back to my knowledge example of, I know it, but knowing it and then doing it or having it be effective, it's not at all effective for me. Is time blocking effective for you, Tyler?
It's really more like I just schedule. I'll leave time open. I'll use editing as an example. If I've got to edit a video and I kind of have a rough idea of how long it'll take, I'll make sure I just simply don't schedule something that morning. But I also won't be like, I'm giving myself 2 hours to work right during this time. Instead, I really just am like, I'm going to give myself more than enough time during this time to do it, because I know I'm going to probably procrastinate to clean my office and I'll probably find 3 other tasks to do while I'm just kind of like putting the video together in my head. And then when it's like crunch time, then the hyper focus happens, and then I get it all done. And I'm always left with the feeling of like, man, if I just did it like right away, I would have been done 3 hours ago.
Yeah.
But it's...
So tell me about your day. How does your day begin?
Well, It used to be really, really, really regimented and structured, and
That to me is time blocking.
yeah, and it's not as much anymore. It probably should start out that way more, but because time blocking doesn't work as effectively for me, and I say that because it requires self-control, and it requires like impulse control or environmental control and because I live in a house with 3 ADHD people, myself included. Environmental control, impulse control, and self-control are pretty much things that don't exist. And so to build scaffolding around that, I go with like vertical blocking, as in I know what I have to do based on what day of the week it is, and then how can I force an action on myself by creating an external like demand or an external stimulus or an external consequence if I don't take that action.
Okay.
So for instance, I know that I have 14 coaching calls on Wednesday, and they start on the hour and on the 30 and on the half hour.
That's how my
Which
Friday
means
is.
if I do not get on if I don't honor that window of time, then I'm dishonoring the next person who starts at 9 o'clock or at 9:30 and so on. And so because I've built zero transition time between them, it's easy to make that transition, or there is no transition. Now, because I would argue, Tyler, do you struggle with transition?
Yeah, I think if I have to like go and if I'm editing and then I have to stop and go film, or
How long does it take you to start editing again?
I mean, it'll take an hour.
Yeah. So like if you think about a transition time, you'll go from like if you finally hyper focus on editing and then you get interrupted or stop, starting editing again is nearly impossible. And so because of that reason, I have to vertically block the one activity that requires no transition, which means I can do all of my coaching calls in a row because there's no transition needed.
Right.
I don't take lunch or eat or any of those things because there's no reason to transition. It's all one hyper-focused activity with external barriers or boundaries that like force me to do that activity. But if not, I have no idea what I would do.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be what I should do. I know that much. I'd
Yeah.
probably listen to something that's entertaining, or I'd probably like learn something because that creates a ton of dopamine. I mean, that's the thing I think is that oftentimes we cognitively believe that we can change our actions by using simplified advice like just time block it, or just eat healthy, or just whatever. However, we're fighting biology, and the biology we're fighting is the simplified version of a habit loop or a dopamine response, right? And so as two people who have a dopamine response issue, we gravitate towards those things that stimulate us with dopamine, which is not editing or not.
Right.
Typically a responsible task that you need to take care of. Yeah.
That's right. So what I found is that if you're someone who can time block, which like, thankfully, Michael,
I haven't always been this way. Like this
Yeah.
is the thing. Like I learned how to do this.
Yeah.
For the longest time, I was that guy that I had off on my calendar during the weekend, and guess what I was doing on the weekend?
Not off.
So I wasn't off.
Yeah.
And so you just have to make a decision. And there's certain, like the most success I've ever had, like what, 50% of what we do is a habit. And if I can get up in the morning without thinking and do this and do this and do this and do
Do you
this,
follow the same routine?
I do.
Is your toothbrush in the same location?
Yes, it is.
Is your do you have something on your nightstand?
Yeah, but
Is everything in the same exact location for the
no,
most part?
I'm
Okay.
not that guy.
Okay.
No, I'm not that guy.
As I say, because a lot of times that's one of the things I think we discount is the fact that like most of what we think is subconscious is actually environmental like cause. Mm-hmm. As in like if your toothbrush is in the same location, then it your cue.
Yes,
To then take
it
that
prompts
action.
you to have the habit. So, for one, I'm really bad at like taking like pills. So if I get a prescription, I have to leave it out because if I set it anywhere, I'm not taking it.
Yeah.
I'm not taking it. So I do need visual cues in order to prompt me to do a behavior.
That's right, and that's why if you have keys, right, if you'll lose your keys if you don't place them in the same place
Right.
over and over, right? If you don't have a system for keeping track of something or an environmental like response that creates a cue or a stimulus for you to take action on something, most of the time it won't happen, or at least it won't happen consistently. And so, or I think about time blocking is instead is how do we get forced behavior, and not truly forced by force, but how do we create
Encouraged.
an environment where the only option is that behavior, because that's the best behavior for us. Because I don't have the ability to exert willpower to not eat the cookies in my pantry.
They just have to be gone.
Therefore, they have to be out of the environment.
Okay.
Or they have to be in an environment that I can't get access to. So if Lauren has the ability to exercise willpower, then she has to move them somewhere where I don't know where they are or where they're locked or whatever.
I heard an interesting take on willpower once. I can't remember where, but it was like suggesting you do keep cookies, like you're not a shit ton of them, but you keep them in the cookie jar in front of you, so that when you actually deny yourself it, you get a release of dopamine when you say no.
Yeah, that's
And
not
it
happening.
was like a little.
It's gonna be the dopamine me eating it.
Yeah, me too, bro.
That's what
Me too.
That's what it was like arguing. Like you shift the way you get the dopamine, and so it is
Yeah.
like
That is
and
good.
it's a way to actively practice willpower, and but you have to choose. Like, what do you want to exert energy on?
Yeah.
Do you want to exert energy on saying no, I'm not going to have a cookie or 6, or
That's
do you
like-
just want to like not have them?
That just makes me think of David Goggins. Like that's such a David Goggins.
Very
Well, is
much.
that the dude that takes cold showers
Yeah.
just to feel
Yeah.
the pain of taking
Yeah.
a shower
Yeah.
cold?
Yep. He's all about suffering, right?
Yeah.
Like I could see some of that. So then so if time blocking works for you, awesome. Do more time blocking.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
If it doesn't work, AKA like me or
Yeah.
apparently Tyler with editing, then what other options are available? Tyler, what have you found to be effective in taking action on something that you resist taking action on or procrastinate,
Yep.
or that allows you to be more effective?
Deadlines.
Okay.
I have to tell the person a deadline too. If it's a self-imposed deadline, like, all right, I'm going to get this done, I won't do it. But if I tell somebody I'm going to get it done, then I make sure I'm like, okay, it has to be. I have a video series I put out every Friday at noon, and I told the guy that I told him I'll post it by noon on Friday. So I make sure I at least have that video done, whether it's Friday morning and it's coming to hey, is this good to go? Then it'll be 2 hours
Did you
before.
pick noon on Friday, or did he?
He did.
He did. Okay.
After kind of talking about
And so what I heard you say was that you wouldn't hit that deadline if it was your own deadline, but you'll hit it to someone else.
yep.
Obliger.
Perfect. So external accountability, commitment to someone else.
That's an obliger.
What else?
Good thing.
That's honestly probably the one thing that
Okay.
I found that has helped, because
How
I've
old are
got
you?
30.
How old are you?
38.
When I turned 37, 38, my check engine light kicked on. And what I mean by that is at certain time, it's about energy conservation.
Yeah.
And so having as much things automated and on autopilot, I could not, willpower is finite. Willpower, by 9 o'clock, if I'm trying to deny myself a cookie, guess what? I'm eating a cookie. But at 10 in the morning, I'll deny myself because my willpower is at its highest. So I time block to do all the things that are important to drive my day in that morning, so that at night I don't have to rely on my willpower. And I'm 41, but I don't want to rely on willpower, because if I rely on willpower at this stage, I'm going to be eating cookies. Does that make sense?
Absolutely does. Absolutely. So a couple of things when we think about like improving effectiveness and adoption rate or implementation of something that you want to execute on, is you could use physical timers or clocks in your environment. I know that you have a timer that you use, right?
I do.
You both do? Perfect.
I do. I use a timer every morning.
I make sure I can see it.
Yeah, so as long as you can see a physical timer, highly effective. That works really well with kids too, right? So, which we're all just basically children, mildly evolved. Having a daily plan, reviewing that every morning and reviewing that in the evening so that you at least have intention on your priority. When you're task switching to create like a trail of breadcrumbs from your task. So what did you last do, and then what are your next steps?
Okay.
To make the transition time easier, right? So like if you're going to get up from editing, Tyler, then you might write and define your next 2 editing steps to make it easier to then not have a transition. Because the wall of not knowing what to do next is oftentimes what prevents us from taking action, right? It's like, well, okay, cool, I'm going to sit down, then what am I going to do? But if it's really clear that I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this, most everything else works itself out afterwards. So creating that breadcrumb trail. For me, I block my email and I block domains. So I try to protect me from me, and I download programs to not receive my inbox during the day and not be able to check like websites that I would waste time on.
Okay.
And so I know that if I pay something to block out my websites and emails, that I will still subconsciously try to make that habit, and thankfully it like prevents me from me. Having group projects or group accountability, so making things public, could be highly effective for
coaching.
Yep, coaching would be perfect, right? That's extra layer of accountability and commitment. Making the same decisions every day, which makes them really indecision at that point. So eating the same foods or wearing the same clothes, right? Wearing the same color. It makes it highly effective, or always doing the same activity in the same environment, having separate spaces for different activities. For instance, when you went boxing, Tyler, you probably didn't also find a squat rack in the middle of the boxing gym.
Right, very isolated area.
That's right. The environment is controlled for one specific activity always, right? It's interesting that in our industry that we lead generate, check email, make phone calls, and do everything all out of the
at the stoplight.
Right. Yeah, that's right. All out of one environment. Yeah. And I'm like, well, it's no wonder our industry is miserably ineffective. Yeah. And the fail rate is, greater than 8 out of 10, right? Is because there are no barriers for effectiveness. We would have you could go even further with having external control, like a lamp timer or something, where if you maybe play video games and find yourself wasting time on Netflix or video games or some sort of external device, you could hook it up to a lamp timer that shuts itself off after 30 minutes.
Right.
Or in order to control the environment. In order to wake up at the same time, I have an obnoxiously loud alarm that I set in the bathroom so that it would wake up Hudson if I don't get up and turn it off right away. And what I know is the least effective thing for morning productivity is to have a 3-year-old awake. And so I get out of bed to turn the alarm off because that has a consequence here, like in the now. Right? So Alexa, for instance, tells Hudson what time he needs to start getting ready in the morning and what time he needs to leave. And then she plays music to remind him to leave in the morning. Nice. Because he doesn't like to leave the house. And she tells him what time he needs to start getting ready for bed and what time he needs to go to bed, because it also takes that responsibility of remembering to do that away from us. Not that we don't remember that our child needs to sleep. It's the energy.
It's the cumulative energy. And when you're an executive, it's white space. Like people don't understand that. Decisions.
Absolutely. Or like you could tell people not to leave you voicemails, right? If you're someone who isn't going to check voicemails, then just set that as your standard. Don't email me, don't voicemail me, don't text me, whatever.
Yeah.
And
I should do that. My voicemail.
voicemail
I just
says
leave it
text
full.
me. Yeah, 'cause I get around to
leaving it full also works because no one can leave you a voicemail.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just leave it full.
I mean,
people be like, "Hey, your voicemail's full." I'm like,
By the
"Oh,
way,
no."
you could just change your greeting that just says, "Hey, my voice box is full, and it will stay full. So calling me back to leave me a new voicemail won't work. Text me, email me,
text.
whatever. Call this person."
100%. I think too, like going to the environment. I think one thing that I've realized I had to do is anytime anybody wants to schedule something, if they schedule with me once, I tell them for future reference, reach out to Kate. Because she's at her computer, like she is at like the command station for our business, so she can always get back to people relatively quick. Because I'll either be out filming or driving or on somewhere, or I'll look at it and I'll just straight up forget.
Oh,
and
100%.
But she doesn't. She's not wired that way. If she has a task at hand, she's like, "Cool, I'll get this done and I'll do this after I finish this, or I'll get to this." It gets done basically.
Yeah.
So. And it can be the most mundane of tasks, but I'll space it. And so I just tell people, if there's ever anything that needs scheduled, I have to check with her anyway, because there's half the time I'm like, I'll just say yes. And you'd think I'd look at the calendar, but I'm like, yeah, it looks free, but
yeah.
So it is.
I love what you said, Eric, because you've given me clarity about, so I'm time block guy. But time blocking isn't enough. You have to take action. And I think people are conflating with put this on your calendar and you're going to do it.
That's right.
And that isn't good enough.
Yeah.
You have to not only time block, what you're saying is you have to then take action. And so I love that, and you're absolutely 100% correct.
Yeah, and sometimes if you even want to eliminate the take action, right, then you just like create
external, your alarm, the environment. So I do that. Like not only I put stuff on my calendar, but if my phone didn't ring every 30 minutes to remind me, to tell me that I had something to do, it wouldn't get done.
Yeah. And so when we think about how do we apply it then, and then how would we apply it in business, you think, or what changes would we make when we find, I think this often comes up when we find, CEOs and executives and mega agents that aren't able to get everything done. And we always give them the advice of time block it or delegate it. And sometimes those are not the best. Sometimes those are not the best answer, because maybe you don't have the budget to delegate it.
Right.
Maybe you don't have the ability to time block anything else. What could you apply from our conversation today, and how someone could take action?
It's not how, it's who. So identifying people within your organization. So like if you're, like we have folks on the ALC, so we can rely on leadership within the market center. If you're an individual agent, that's why you want to have an assistant, or you want to aspire to have like an assistant. So then you want to be able to focus on the top 20%, the income producing activities. So you're delegating those 80% are the things that's not making you money out.
So if I'm broke and I don't have the ability to do any of that, how do I get there?
Dude, I've been there. Dude, y'all, I've been there. I know. True, to be honest with you, allowing just to have focus. And I say keep using word time blocking, but then time blocking and then taking action. And over time, the cumulative effect, you will get there. Like it might not be overnight, but I have been that guy that's been so broke, you're going to know if you're going to keep your house. And you just stay focused and do the activities, and then you go back and you look back and you're like, man, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, I think I think the easiest one, if you don't have money, is you just tell somebody, like either that's with you or like somebody that you know is going to check in on you, and especially I think somebody that you just like don't want to disappoint. That's where I think having a coach comes in super handy. But if you can't afford a coach, you just still find somebody that's
join a group.
Yep.
Find a mentor. Find somebody who's been someone good.
Right. Yeah. You need to find somebody that's good, that doesn't mind also just being like, did you do it? And you don't want to say no.
What about you? What do you think?
I mean, I think a couple of things I heard from both of you is I think you first have to understand yourself. It is like, who are you? What motivates you? What do you have a pattern of that you will say yes to and say no to? For instance, in Tyler's example, Tyler will say yes to someone outside of himself, but will say no to himself. Same way that I am.
I am the same way.
Right? So the likelihood is we're probably all that way, but I don't know. Kate's high introvert, so maybe she's more self-motivated than external motivated, like the three of us. So know yourself. That way you can figure out what system, what barriers or scaffolding you need in your own life in order to be able to take that action. But then I think it's also getting clear on what are the actual action steps themselves. Yeah. So saying that you will lead generate during this time frame is not enough.
No.
You need to then know,
what
okay,
are you going to do?
Who am I going to call?
Yeah.
What am I going to say? How often am I going to talk to these people? What days of the week am I going to call this list of people and that list of people? Get really clearly defined so that none of the action steps are ambiguous.
That is the biggest thing. You have a big project and you're like, how the hell am I going to do that? But it's just like, okay, what's the smallest thing? And then you time block that.
Yeah, I think it's understanding what that is, though. Can be the challenge is, where do you start?
Yeah.
Right.
I think even if it's lead generating, I'm going back to like my real estate days when I was ISA, and I had to make sure that I had the list of numbers in front of me or easily accessible.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to look for who I was going to have to call. It was like, okay, I'm going to make these 50 dials, and then I'm gonna headphones help keep you.
I'm gonna sit down, and this is my only choice, right? There's a list of people.
Yep. And then a lot of times too, it's just getting started. I really am a firm believer in just do it for 10 minutes, and then just, if you don't want to do it anymore after that, don't do it. But like, I'd say 80% of the time that I just set a 10-minute timer, and I'm just like, just start. And like, typically it just starts with sorting. Like for my B-roll, like I'll go through a lot of footage and I've just got to skim. And so that's like the tedious part. But once I start, it's kind of like, okay, I'm getting this.
How many times you go to the gym and you're on that machine and you're like, man, I don't want to be here. And you get on that machine after 10 minutes, it's like,
you just don't, you don't want to stop because you're just like, well, I already got started.
I'm on here I got another X amount of minutes. I may as well finish it out.
Yep,
so
that's
what it is.
You know, just 10 minutes can really, even with cleaning, like I'll just set a timer and just like, all right, I'm just going to clean for 10 minutes and just kind of get my desk organized. So then it's not chaotic. And that's typically a procrastination tool. But a lot of times I end up just getting it done. I'm like, okay, cool. I got a task done. Now it's time to do this. And then it's start.
Yeah. So you're taking a bigger project, you're taking a wall that's in front of you and making it smaller into
significantly smaller,
right? And then it's really clear, because most of the time the thing that causes inaction is ambiguity. Yeah. Right? Is when we get really clear on the step-by-step process that goes into being able to take action. Now, this is not everyone, but I think most executives and most real estate agents fit a personality profile, especially when you think about agents. Agents are never known to be highly disciplined. And think about the reasons why, though. Agents are typically known to be highly... They're like highly agreeable, and they're interactive, and they're persuasive, and they're engaging. They're very rarely also have that accountant taskmaster personality.
Right.
Those two personality traits are in conflict with each other.
Right.
And so the person who is externally gregarious oftentimes needs that additional scaffolding in order to take action. And so building that into your environment is one of the most effective ways to do that. A couple of quick examples as we wrap things up that I want people to be aware of and see outside of whatever industry they're in that cause big changes to happen that also save lives. So one of the examples that I love about crafting the environment for one outcome only is the concept of a sterile cockpit. And so the FAA has a restriction that under 10,000 feet, you can't use your electronics, right? And it's not because your electronics play some mysterious, devilish game with the actual plane itself. It's because the largest amount of accidents occur under 10,000 feet.
Okay.
Right? All the risk in airplane crashes happens below a certain altitude. And so if you notice on a plane, the flight attendants are sitting down, not talking. The pilots are in their seats flying, not talking. That's because everyone is focused and controlling the environment for the most unsafe phase of the flight. And in doing that, plane crashes have drastically reduced to a near minuscule amount, right? We don't know the last time we probably heard of a major crash in America, thankfully.
Big Boxer just got on a plane. Gerald, I don't even remember his name, but there was something Davis. Just got in a plane crash under 10,000 feet, though, as they were taking off. So I was like, dang, that's relevant, man. I was like, did they have their phones out now?
Yeah.
But it was fine. Everybody lived. But it was like during takeoff. So it is interesting that, like, you mentioned
did not know that
most plane crashes happen.
Yeah. And so, but it's the FAA said in order to save lives, we must control the environment.
Yep.
And in order to do that, they made it really clear that they're at 10,000 and below, sterile cockpit, right? Nothing happens except for this, below this altitude.
They should explain that. And I would be less anxious when I'm on the flight, upset while my phone isn't on.
I know, right? And so instead of there are a lot of things that should be better explained, like that whole...
The why behind the what.
Right? But when you look at if you go to, so another last example, if you go to a factory or to some, industrial machining facility, you'll oftentimes see markers on the ground of different colors, like painted stripes. Or even so, if you're in a warehouse or manufacturing facility, you'll see a yellow stripe typically around that, and that's usually the line where you have to wear a hard hat, right? And that's your cue, your environmental control that says beyond this line, wear a hard hat. Same thing in the NFL. You see the box for the coaches, right?
Yep.
Here's where you can run, and here's where you cannot. When you cross this line, you've crossed the line.
Yep.
And so we know that human behavior requires external stimulus and cues and triggers. Unfortunately, though, in business, we oftentimes don't take those into account. And then instead we judge someone on the actions that they take or the inaction they take by providing them no external stimulus to take the right actions.
Perfect example. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Look at all these footprints everywhere you go, 6 feet, we all know what 6 feet are, but that prompts you to, when you see all these 6 feet, I need to be mindful to stay 6 feet.
That's a good point.
So what do you do in your business different this week?
I did like I've had when you mentioned type out or write out all right, these are the next 2 steps when I come back to a task. I think that's helpful. A lot of times I'll end at a task. I'll be like, okay, I'm just going to get to this point and then stop. But then thinking about how am I going to come back to it to minimize the transition phase, I think is applicable in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
Like making sure you have gas before you leave the night before instead of I'll get gas in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I'm going to do is there's some of the things that I do time block for. There's some things that I never miss. And there's some things that I'm like, I'm doing this. I'll keep doing that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to strengthen my environmental stimulus. So maybe I'm more apt to take those times. So maybe, you know what I'm saying? There's still things on my calendar that I still kind of blow past. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to try to be more mindful about that.
Yeah. The 2 things I found that are effective for me is I need checklists and worksheets. Worksheets are helpful for me, because it allows me to go through and answer questions. So like when I'm prepping for our show, I have to use a worksheet. Right? If I'm now I'm doing content 5 days a week. That takes a lot of mental bandwidth, right? And so in order to do that, I have to like unravel all of the inbound information I take in on a weekly basis in order to externalize it somehow. Yeah. Having a worksheet and someone with me to unravel that has been one of the most effective ways to do it.
So what would you say you're going to work on your business this week?
I need to, I bought a timer this morning because that's something that I'm horribly time blind at. And then I'm going to also, I hired a trainer so that I can exercise better self-care, because nothing's more effective for productivity and for effectiveness than exercise.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
When you feel like crap, it just sucks to work.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It does.
I mean, it's if you think about it, it's like exercise is one of the most effective things you can do for your willpower. It's one of the most effective things you can do for dopamine. It's one of the most effective things you can do for your brain health. And it's also one of the first things we do away with when we get too busy. Yeah. And so we try to get more productive by actually disabling the thing that makes you arguably the most productive.
Once I learned that the value of because I'll do HIIT classes. I know if I go to the gym with just I'm supposed to do these exercises, I very much am aware of how much I half-ass the exercises, or just won't push myself, or just won't even know where to start. So having somebody be like, all right, you're doing this for this amount of time, and if I have to count, I'm going to lose count. You better just give me a timer, and I'll just keep do as many as I can until you tell me to stop, and I'll do the next thing. And that's what I've noticed. It's something I'm very, very grateful to be able to do, is be able to have a trainer.
So that's what I need to do. That'll be my thing. So I have a marriage counselor. That's a coach.
Yeah,
I have a team lead coach. I have a coach over my real estate team. So I need to just bite. I need a health coach.
It helps.
I just need to do it.
Yep.